experience on 9/11, I remember it was a Tuesday. It was a beautiful day. I remember walking to the PATH train and actually thinking to myself what a nice day it was. I got to work in the morning, the World Trade Center in the South Tower at around 7:15 in the morning. I remember having a couple conversations with a couple different people. I think actually about just normal things. Michael Jordan had just come out of retirement. That was like the big story of the day. And then I remember like an explosion sounded like a generator blowing. And that's what a lot of people thought it was at first, was a generator blowing. So we went to the windows and we saw debris and like paper and stuff on fire falling out of the sky. So as it turns out, as everybody knows, the other building was hit, and all that stuff blew out past my building to the other side of Liberty Street. After that, my boss, who was an ex-Marine, who had been there in '93 when it was bombed the first time, said that that was some kind of explosion and that we should all just get out of the building. So we all grabbed, whatever. I think I just grabbed my wallet and keys. And we, for some reason, went to the stairwell. So we walked 31 floors down. Nobody was really like running or panicking. It wasn't until we got down to the lobby, maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, that you could see out into the street that the debris was not caused by a small plane. So then there was the thought that it was a large plane. And terrorism at that point didn't really play into it. There was debris falling like all around, like walking through it and still coming down. And then I guess I was about 4 blocks east going towards the seaport. I heard this like low droning sound, which turned out to be jet plane engines. I didn't recognize the sound. I saw that, that fireball that everybody sees on the news flying out of the south building. I turned around and I saw that. At which point then I knew it was a terrorist attack or something of that nature. And then I remember running, I guess north, trying to find a payphone, which I didn't find for another half an hour or so to call my wife, because no cell service worked. But every place I wound up stopping, I stopped in front of the FBI building, and then I stopped in front of Town Hall, and I stopped in front of some other judicial building, and I was thinking to myself, well, why am I stopping in front of these buildings? This could be another target. So I found a phone, I called my wife, told her that I was, out of the building and I was fine, and I was going to try to make my way home, which took me, until 9:30 at night. I have a younger brother who was also working in the city at the time, who worked in the World Financial Center across from World Trade. So I called back home, and then he called back home, and eventually the two of us wound up meeting up some hours later. And then, as I said, around 9:30 we wound up at Chelsea Piers and caught a ferry back to New Jersey, where my brother-in-law, who lived in Hoboken, he and his wife picked me up and my brother and drove us back to West Caldwell. I don't know, it was just very surreal. I was happy to be back in New Jersey, happy to be, in someone's car heading back home. One of the neighbors had already brought down an American flag and hung it up in front of our house, and it was comforting to have people around. But that's pretty much all I remember about returning home. It was very foggy after that. Everybody at my firm 400 plus people did leave, and everybody got out and everybody survived. And by that evening, everybody was accounted for. Yeah, the last person to leave was that individual who told us to get out, my boss at the time. He was actually in the building on the 31st floor when the second plane hit somewhere in the 70s, and he felt that whole building sway. Probably two things. That fireball that I mentioned earlier is something that I'll never forget. I mean, it was huge and loud, and we've never been like in any type of war situation. You can only imagine that that's what it kind of looks and sounds like. And the second was, as I mentioned earlier, my younger brother, he knew that I worked in the World Trade Center. He knew I was in number 2, which is the South Tower. After the first building was hit and people were evacuating, he didn't know whether that first building was 1 or 2. So he asked the police officer that if it was 1 or 2, and he said 1. So he felt some relief. And seconds later, he looked up and the plane hit the building that he knew that I worked in. So the vivid memory part comes in when we, like a couple hours later, we met up at like a friend of mine's office on 22nd Street. And, him coming out of the elevator into the lobby where I was, that's probably my second most, or maybe even first, most vivid memory. Because he was, extremely relieved, obviously, that I was alive, and it was very traumatic for him as well. I was all for the decision to go to war. For sure, I was angry. I was upset. I had people I knew who died. And I was 100% behind going to war. And I still feel that way. That was just and justifiable, the war in Afghanistan, for sure. I gotta say I was pretty indifferent. I mean, I knew right away that that's what was gonna happen once it was cleaned up. Just, knowing the way New York is and the American people are, that would go back up, or something would go back up there. I mean, I would go, but I'm not going to really go out of my way because I think it's going to be incredibly sad, and I'm not really into putting myself in situations that are really sad. It's not for me. Before that, didn't think about it, got on the train, didn't look around, didn't look for bags. I won't say it's stressful on a daily basis, but I think it's something that accumulates and causes me some anxiety. I'd like to say on some level it makes me appreciate life and everything I have, and I'm sure it does. Somewhere in my subconscious, I'd like to say I wake up every day and I'm grateful, which I am, but it doesn't always just resonate in my head every day. So that's probably the two biggest ways it affects my everyday life.